Good day, LML4807 student. Today we will look at a practical concerning money laundering. Now, money laundering is quite a comprehensive topic under South African law. So your study unit or lesson for money laundering is quite long. You need to allow for sufficient time to master the content. Also, in case of money laundering, there's different ways how we may ask a question. We can ask a practical question, or we can also ask theory questions, or we can have questions where we have a bit of theory, a bit of practical application, but we link it back to a factual scenario. Money laundering fits in with other topics that you have studied as well. For example, money laundering can fit in with a question on the Banks Act. Money laundering would also be appropriate to ask when we deal with financial inclusion. Make sure that you can see where money laundering would fit in, and also then when you prepare for your exams, but also when you take your knowledge of money laundering further one day, be aware that this topic interacts with other topics forming part of the broader banking law field. Now, for today's question, I'm giving you a practical. I'm telling you, you are the compliance manager for ABBA Bank. They are a registered bank. You review applications for your corporate clients who wants to open an investment account. And you see the application of 123Pty Limited. And something there triggers your interest. You see, firstly, Peter Smith and Thabo Sigole were identified as the only directors for this company. So you have a printout from the CIPC to see who the directors are. However, you see this application form to open the investment account was signed by Sue Blake. She's not a director as listed on the CIPC form. Also, in the bundle of documents you are reviewing, you see there are share certificates for those shares issued by 123Pty Limited. From that, you can see this company has only one shareholder that holds, well, they might have more than one, but you only have a share certificate for one of them, Capital Pty Limited, who holds 20% ordinary shares in 123Pty Limited. Okay, now you're the compliance officer. You have these documents before you, and you need to then decide whether you have sufficient information to figure 123Pty Limited before they open an investment account. Okay, now here you can see an example of an easy theory question. I start off by asking you whether ABBA Bank would be an accountable institution or a reporting institution in terms of figure. So, what is the purpose of this question? To test whether you know the difference between an accountable institution and a reporting institution. Immediately you know Schedule 1 to figure lists the types of accountable institutions, one being banks. Can you remember in your question I told you ABBA Bank is a registered bank, so they would be an accountable institution. But obviously this question counts 3 marks, and I tell you to explain to me whether they are an accountable institution or reporting institution. So you've only done the first part of the question if you explained that they are an accountable institution. You haven't told me yet whether they are also a reporting institution. For this you go then to Schedule 3 to figure where the schedule specifically lists motor vehicle dealers and persons dealing in Kruger Rands as reporting institutions. Now in your question, did I tell you anything about ABBA dealing in Krugerrands or being a motor vehicle dealer? No, I didn't. So obviously then, ABBA would not be a reporting institution. Okay, my second question asks you to discuss in detail which documents you would need to figure 1, 2, 3. Now this is a practical question for you in the sense that you have to go and give me a list of the relevant documents that you need to provide. Now where do you start with such a long question? Okay, first step. Do you agree with me that 1, 2, 3 is a Pty Limited? So it's a company. Immediately you know then that in FICA, after the 2017 amendment, certain sections were included which relates to how you would go about getting the FICA documents for a legal person, a trust, or a partnership. So remember what we've been telling you now for a while, that in all of your questions you must give us authority. So your authority in this question would be section 21B of FICA. Now, what do you need to establish? Firstly, the nature of the client's business, the ownership or control structure, and then the beneficial ownership of the client. So, firstly, identify each natural person who on their own or with another person has controlling interest or controlling ownership in the legal person. Now, do you agree that this is not possible in your question? So, if you cannot perform step 2, you must identify the identity of the natural person who exercises control over the legal person through other means. We might be able to do this. Then if step 2 is not possible, determine the identity of the natural person who exercises control over the management of the legal person. Okay, now let's do this practically. Do you agree I told you that you have only 20% of the shareholding certificates, or the certificates amounting for 20% of the shareholding? So what are you going to do? You're going to request copies of all the share certificates, or if we're still using the old days, the share register for the company. Now can you remember I told you it's a Pty Limited, so obviously this company is not listed on the Joburg Stock Exchange. It's a privately owned company. Okay, so that's your first step. Then you're going to ask yourself, is it not possible to determine the identity of the natural person who exercises control over the legal person through other means? Now, do you agree with me? I say nothing about the management of the company in this question. Now, step 2 might not be possible. So you go and you determine the identity of the natural person who exercises control over the management of the legal person, so the company. So that would be an executive officer, that would be a non-executive director, an independent non-executive director, or director or manager. Now, for step 3, do you agree with me that here we are dealing with 3 people? So, Peter Smith and Thabo Segole were mentioned as directors. So what are you going to ask? I want identity documents from them, as well as proof of residence for these individuals. Now, luckily you have the printout from CIPC, and something that you can also ask them for is the memorandum of incorporation of the company, because obviously you need to see who's got the powers to do what on behalf of the company. Do you also agree with me that in your question, I tell you Sue Blake is not a director, but she signed the application form to open the investment account. Now, in the question we asked about control in the through the management of the company. So you're getting a suspicion that Sue Blake might be their financial officer or something to this effect. So what are you going to ask for? You need a document to show you Sue Blake has authority to act on behalf of the company. Now this can be in two places. You can either have her name specifically included in the memorandum of incorporation of the company. Remember, your memorandum of incorporation is the blueprint for any company. It says what the company can or cannot do. So you're going to have a copy of that and see if it mentions Sue Blake. If not, then you say, okay, I want a copy of a resolution signed by the majority of your directors, and you know you have Peter in Tabu, authorizing Sue to act on behalf of the company in order to open an investment account. So that's what you're going to ask for. And then, if you have your document authorizing Sue, you're going to ask for an identity document for Sue, and then proof of residence for Sue as well. There will always be additional requirements that a bank may request, and you have to just then double check with them if there are not any additional documents or information that they're going to need from you. Some examples might even include them asking for a letter from the auditor confirming the shareholding of the company. Now remember, earlier I told you that you need to establish the beneficial ownership or control of the company. So what is the easiest way of getting that apart from asking for your share certificates? Getting a letter from the auditor for this specific company confirming who the shareholders are for that specific company. Also, there are some banks that then, in addition to the CIPC printout, ask for proof of the registered business address of a company. So also look out for that. Do you see now how we incorporated specific aspects of the law as part of our discussion in how to practically deal with a question on money laundering? Now, this was a very short lecture, but it just showed you how we can practically ask a question dealing with money laundering. In the lesson itself, there are many definitions that might also be asked. And make sure that for each and every lesson that you study in banking law, that you familiarize yourself with all of the concepts relating to money laundering. On a final note, also then be aware of specific aspects of the 2017 amendment to FICA, which would also make a very interesting question to ask. Concepts here that you might need to look into further would include your risk-based approach and how a risk-based approach would work. All of the best with your studies for this week. Again, as always, our contact details appears on the slide on the screen, and you are welcome to contact us if you need any assistance with the content of the discussion this week. All of the best with your studies.